The envelope from the Crestwood Fertility Clinic felt like it held the entire weight of our future. For 5 years, Chloe and I had lived in a cycle of desperate hope and crushing disappointment. We'd endured the silent pity at family gatherings, the well-meaning but hollow advice, and the private brief that followed 2 miscarriages. We'd poured our savings into treatments that felt more like scientific gambles than miracles. So when I saw the word pregnant, followed by viable, strong heartbeat, the air left my lungs in a single shocked gasp. Chloe, standing across the kitchen island, her face pale with anticipation, saw my expression and her hands flew to her mouth. A sound escaped her, half sob, half laugh, and we stumbled into each other's arms, clinging together, as if we'd just been rescued from a shipwreck. We were finally, impossibly, safe on shore. The pregnancy was a season of pure, unadulterated light. We became a team of 2, dedicated to the well-being of the tiny life we called Sprout. We turned the spare room into a sanctuary of soft colors, debating paint swatches with the gravity of world leaders negotiating a treaty. I assembled the crib 3 times before I was satisfied it was perfectly sturdy. Chloe, an architect, designed a mobile of delicate, hand-painted wooden stars and planets. Even the 38-week appointment was a formality, the last checkpoint before the final sprint. Chloe waddled into the clinic, her smile effortless, her hand resting on the magnificent curve of her stomach. We were joking with the ultrasound technician, a woman named Brenda, who had become a familiar fixture in our joy. "This one's a soccer player," Brenda chuckled as the screen showed a flurry of movement. And then her laughter died. The room grew quiet, save for the staticky whoosh of the machine. Brenda's smile tightened. She pressed the wand deeper, moving it with a new, frantic urgency. "Baby's just being stubborn," she murmured, but her eyes darted to the door. "I'll be right back." The silence she left behind was deafening, a physical presence pressing in on us. When Dr. Evans entered, his face was a placid lake, but his eyes held the storm. "Chloe, Daniel, I'm so sorry." The words, "no cardiac activity." The induced labor was a cruel parody of the birth we had imagined. The delivery room, which should have been filled with cries of effort and triumph, was a tomb of silent, efficient sorrow. When Samuel was born, the silence was absolute. He was perfect. 5 pounds, 7 ounces, with a dusting of dark hair and my father's chin. We held him, taking turns cradling his impossibly small body, memorizing the weight of him, the shape of his ears, the tiny, wrinkled fingers. We told him all the dreams we had for him, our tears falling onto the green and yellow blanket he was swaddled in. Burying him was like burying a part of ourselves. The small white casket was a brutal period at the end of a sentence we thought was just beginning. Point. The house we returned to was no longer a home. It was a museum of a future that had been canceled. The nursery door remained shut, a sealed vault containing all our broken promises. Chloe retreated into a cavern of grief I couldn't penetrate. She stopped talking, stopped eating, moving through the rooms like a phantom. I, in turn, buried myself in work, taking on any project that would fill the hours and numb the pain. We were 2 ghosts, orbiting each other in a shared space of misery, utterly alone. A month after the funeral, driven by a grim sense of duty, I knew I had to face the nursery. I had to dismantle the shrine, piece by heartbreaking piece. The air in the room was stale and sweet with the scent of unused baby lotion. It smelled of loss. I worked methodically, my movements robotic, folding tiny clothes into cardboard boxes, each tiny sock a fresh ache. When I got to the large, fabric-covered ottoman, I lifted the lid to pack the blankets inside. As I did, my wrist scraped against the interior lining, and I felt a sharp, unexpected corner of something hard. Puzzled, I felt around. There was a deliberate slit in the fabric, carefully restitched with a few loose loops of thread. A secret. My heart, which had been beating a slow, mournful rhythm, suddenly kicked into a frantic gallop. With trembling fingers, I picked at the threads until the seam gave way. I reached into the dark, insulated space, and my hand closed around a cold, crisp manila envelope. There was no name on it. I broke the seal, my breath held in my chest. A single sheet of paper slid out. It was a report from Aegis Investigations. The header listed a case number and my name, Daniel Reed, as the subject. The stated objective was a discrete genetic screening for hereditary markers related to Huntington's disease and cystic fibrosis. I stared, uncomprehending. Huntington's? My family history was a clean slate of longevity. The report concluded I carried no markers, but it was the handwritten note scrawled in blue ink at the bottom of the page that made the world tilt on its axis. Per your additional, off-the-record request, prenatal paternity analysis was conducted via retrieved sample. Subject, Daniel Reed, is confirmed as the biological father, 99.98% probability. Awaiting further instructions regarding continued surveillance. The words paternity analysis and surveillance seemed to pulse on the page, venomous and vile. A cold clarity washed over me, freezing the grief solid. The joyful months of her pregnancy, the whispered names in the dark, my hand on her belly feeling our child move. It had all been a performance for her. While I was building a future, she was building a case. She had me followed. She had our unborn child tested to see if he was mine. The betrayal was so profound, so calculated, it felt like a physical violation. I stumbled out of the nursery. The report crumpled in my fist, a white-hot rage beginning to thaw the ice in my veins. I found her on the living room sofa, curled under a blanket, staring at a television screen that was showing a muted cartoon. I didn't speak. I simply dropped the single sheet of paper onto her lap. The transformation was instantaneous and horrifying. The color drained from her face, leaving a ghastly gray mask. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. A guttural, animalistic wail tore from her throat as she scrambled off the couch, collapsing onto the floor. "It was my mother," she shrieked, her body convulsing with sobs. "She poisoned me. She said you were too good to be true. She said a man who wanted a family that badly must be hiding something. She told me I needed proof, leverage, in case you left. The test was for her, to prove her wrong. I never believed it, Daniel. I swear on our son's grave." Her explanation was a torrent of excuses, each one digging the hole of her betrayal deeper. It wasn't her doubt, but her mother's. It wasn't her lack of faith, but her weakness in the face of it. She had allowed a paranoid outside voice to desecrate the most sacred trust of our marriage. She had turned our miracle into a specimen, our love into a probability percentage. The fact that the test had ultimately proven my paternity was a moot, insulting point. The act itself was the unforgivable crime. The foundation of our entire relationship had been exposed as rotten. The woman I had loved, the woman I had planned to grow old with, was a stranger capable of a cold, premeditated deception that made a mockery of our vows. I packed a bag that night. The sound of my zipper was loud in the silence, punctuated by her ragged, hysterical pleas from the hallway. "We can get through this! We've survived worse! We need to grieve Samuel together!" she cried. her voice cracking. But that was the final, cruelest twist. We couldn't. I could not mourn the loss of my son with the person who had murdered the trust that was supposed to be his foundation. My grief for Samuel was pure, a searing pain of love and loss. My feeling for Chloe was a toxic compound of rage, disgust, and a betrayal so deep it felt bottomless. They could not coexist. The divorce was a swift, sterile procedure. I gave her the house, the furniture, everything. I wanted no relics from that shipwreck. The last time I saw her, across a table at our lawyer's office, she was a hollowed-out ghost of the woman I'd married, her eyes pleading for an absolution I could not grant. I lost my son that year, and in the wreckage he left behind, I also lost my wife, my future, and my faith in the very concept of unconditional love. All that remained was the echo of a devastating truth, hidden in the lining of an ottoman. A truth more silent and still than the child we had buried, and in its own way, infinitely more destructive.